In this video, we are going to talk about assets. Now, assets can be a pretty frightening term the first couple of times you hear it, because in terms of Unity, an asset can be many, many things. So to simplify it down, you can think of an asset as an aspect of your game.
It's a building block.
Yeah. That will be referenced by some component. Or by another asset. And that's where it starts to get really vague and kind of scary. Now, if you ask me to be specific, what kind of things are assets? What can you put your finger on and say, that's an asset and that's an asset? Well, you could say things like 3D models. Actually, before I even go there, let's break it down like so. I got another way to go about it. Let's say we have external assets. And we have, I'm going to draw a line here for some division, we have internal assets. The difference being external assets come from other packages, from other applications, and internal assets can be created right inside of Unity. So an external asset would be things like 3D models, or textures, or sound effects. There should be a D and not a T. Let me just redo the whole thing. Could even include scripts if you want to look at it that way, because in most cases you're going to be creating your scripts in some other application, even if it's Unisite, the one that's included along with Unity. It's still technically a separate program that's running, and then you bring that in. Now, there are some internal assets as well that are created right inside of Unity. Lee, what's some examples of those?
You have things like materials, shaders.
Mm-hmm.
You have, I believe it's cube maps is another one. Physics materials.
Actually, it's just physics materials, and I always mess that up too.
Yeah.
And then one that'll always it'll throw you off if you're not ready for it is prefabs. Prefabs are also assets. So that's just one more area where the terminology can get a little bit vague and a little bit scary, because we already talked about prefabs. I don't know the order in which you've watched these videos, but in the progression of our terminology videos, we already had one that discussed prefabs specifically, and never once did we say that prefabs were an asset, but they are. They are indeed a type of asset. Now, if we jump over into Unity, you'll see that we actually have an assets menu. And in here, you can import new assets. This is where you'll bring in FBX files, for instance. If you've created a new model with a texture and whatnot inside of Maya or 3ds Max or any other application that happens to support the FBX format, this is where you'll bring that in. You can also use it to bring in textures and bring in sound effects and any of your external assets.
Of course, you can also drag and drop inside of your project panel. If you look, everything inside of your project panel is an asset. That's
right. Just as everything in our hierarchy panel was a game object, everything you find inside of our project file is some form of asset. And that's a really good way to keep them straight in your head while you're working with Unity. But that's really the crux of what I want to get across here, is just the fact that your assets are going to be referenced in some way by another component or asset. I mean, I guess the one exception to that rule would be like a prefab, because really they just go right into your scene as they are. But you could also say that they're being referenced by an instance, which is another game object, and that gets into a whole lot of terminology.
Right. And prefabs rely on other assets inside of your project itself.
That's right. But I mean, like a 3D model is going to rely on a mesh filter to store that model into geometry, and a mesh renderer to make it visible, and possibly some form of collider, like a mesh collider to handle any sort of physical simulation in the world. All of these things are going to be referenced by some component on a game object in order to give you an in-game effect. So that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks for watching.